Leonidas, king of Sparta, when a neighboring state would plead for military aid, would send one episode of the 508 podcast. It's June the 15th, 2018, and this is episode number 300 of the 508 show, a show about Worcester. Our panel today is Worcester legend Kevin Ksen, Brendan Melican. Brendan, can you scoot closer to Kevin?
I can, yeah.
Worcester legend Brendan Melican,
And
who's
noisemaker.
mighty sliding microphone, and myself, Michael Benedetti. This is such an exciting week. I haven't even looked up the cost of Brent crude oil. I know that Bitcoin is down probably around 15 to 20% on the week.
Ethereum's up, though.
Ethereum is up. On the week it's up?
Well, it was up a little bit over the last 24 hours because there were some comments made about it not meeting requirements for further oversight as a security.
Oh, okay.
So it kind of bounced a little bit.
Well, that is interesting.
Yeah.
Well, I want to... So we've been doing this show for a long time. We've been doing this show since September the 14th, 2007, which was back when we just did it on Skype, And back in the day, I feel like the most common panelists on the show were me, Brendan, Kevin Ksen, and the late Jeff Barnard.
Well, that's mostly because Kevin and Jeff were the only people that would talk to us.
They would wake up early in the morning. Well, and one of the reasons that we started doing the show was that the media landscape in 2007 was very different, and that Kevin at the time was doing some community organizing around the Worcester Police Department being used to tape the show Cops, and some of the weird negative things that were happening as a result of that. And while he was doing this, he got himself arrested, and in particular for taking photos of the police. And the local journalists, of course, as you might expect, took a very anti-First Amendment stance and were just like condemning Kevin. And it was a different age in terms of communication, in that it was hard to hear it was hard to find somebody who was saying, you know what, actually maybe Kevin Ksen got a raw deal. Maybe actually the police department is doing something crazy for arresting a dude for standing on a sidewalk taking pictures, just because they're mad about a TV thing. And so we started doing this podcast. And the first episode we talked a lot about Gary Rosen. So certain things about this podcast are exactly the same, Brendan.
You know what's kind of crazy when you think about it too, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, Kevin, is like based just on what Mike just said. When we started doing this, it was like nobody was prepared for the idea that in the course of 10 years, like the Telegram would go from taking up an entire building with multiple floors of staff to like one small corner of an office building. That a lot of upstart sort of media would actually start filling in gaps in a meaningful way from traditional media. And also, to Mike's point, talking about your arrest, that anyone with a Snapchat account would essentially be considered a journalist by every stretch of the imagination. And that's really only been 7 years, and it's kind of crazy to think that.
Well, it's been 11 years.
11 years. So my math is terrible.
Similar though.
Like the same, but a little bit more. But not a long time frame in the grand scheme of things. And it seems as though the one thing that has changed really is that people don't seem to care anymore. People just seem to be used to the idea that like news just comes shared via Facebook and is completely untrustworthy. And I think the only thing that has changed is normal people spend a lot more time fact-checking in themselves on Snopes than they used to. But the landscape has changed drastically, and it seems like the one thing that I didn't expect is that people kind of adapted in not necessarily a good way.
Kevin, your response.
Yeah, well, I think one thing I'm remembering from back then was I think we all put a lot more weight on blogs back then. They were looking like they were going to be the alternative. So a lot of my photography back then was connected directly to Worcester Indie Media, which I think all of us did a little bit different ways at different times.
Yeah.
To try and get the word out there from a different perspective.
I was listening to episode number 100 of the show also, which was an episode that we did when we were riding around on the bus in episode 2010. And, some of the things people said in that episode, were probably accurate, and some of them in retrospect were wrong. One of the wrongest things, I think, was Brendan fairly confidently chiding the city for spending maybe too much effort invested into their Facebook and Twitter accounts because of the idea that, these are not going to last that long as platforms, guys. You can't really fall in love with them too much. And again, like at the time, that certainly seemed like a reasonable position. And in retrospect, it's like completely wrong.
But is it though? Because, I mean, like, just as of last week, I mean, the data that Facebook is putting out that their user base is actually is very similar to Fox News and CNN, where, like, nobody in any sort of meaningful numbers, nobody under the age of 60 uses Facebook. Facebook is like the telephone of our, the landline telephone of our generation.
Sure.
Twitter, I think, is a signal to noise ratio that is very few people pay attention to, other than unless they're engaged in that universe and just like yelling at people. And then, Instagram and Snapchat have done a really fantastic job of picking up the slack on the younger generation. If I do remember that conversation we had, though, it was based on the idea that non-institutional media tends to cycle through very quickly. So, like, Friendster had a useful lifespan. MySpace had a useful lifespan. Facebook, the only difference between that and MySpace is internet access globally that has bumped numbers through the roof. So there's still a lot of long-tail revenue to be made. But I think anyone should be able to look at it and say it's a dead platform in the same way cable's a dead platform.
What's not a dead platform? All platforms are dead platforms?
No, I'm just saying, like, Facebook would be considered a dead platform, similar to, like, cable television is a dead platform. Even though people use it, the numbers are decreasing so drastically. So it's not. I would argue that there's not a lot of value in investing a lot of resources in any one platform.
The other side of that question is it a good place for the city to be investing time and energy?
Sure.
So I divorce that from the value in life of any of the social media platform. Is this the way the city should be using it? I haven't seen social media be social for the city of Worcester yet. I don't think anywhere.
No.
And they're good about posting stuff. They'll occasionally make a Facebook event or something like that. But in terms of interaction, social, engaging, I don't know if I've seen that yet in any media.
I've seen it. That's my only response to that. I want to talk about what we talked about in 2007. And again, this was just like a Skype call between me and Brendan. We talked about the preliminary city council agenda that year, or the preliminary city council election that year, which we started off with 18 council candidates, went down to 12. That was the first year, I think, that Grace Ross ran for Worcester City Council, and she did very well in that prelim. Based on the prelim, she would have won election to the city council. It was not to be. We talked to Shannon Sr. via the phone in that episode about the fight against Walmart opening in Worcester, a fight which, again, was lost. There was about a 14% election turnout. This was an election in which Kate Toomey and Gary Rosen did really, really well in the preliminary election, like to the point that people were somewhat surprised by this. There were a lot of angry online commenters about the city council's latest pay raise, although it does not seem to have actually impacted anybody's voice or anybody's votes. You predicted that Joe Petty might have a hard time in the general election because of his showing in that preliminary election. I was not doing a lot of predictions in this episode, by the way. So
you never like doing predictions. You always stick me with the raw deal job of making predictions and then beating me up over them. I want to start getting your predictions on things.
We also talked about how there was a lot of hostility towards Joe Petty. Do you remember what this even was?
No.
I have no idea what this was. And you were predicting non-ironically that Gary Rosen would mayor, and you were non-ironically sad that Bill Coleman had not done better.
Yeah.
I also non-ironically would have predicted both those things. Bill Coleman still never on the Worcester City Council. Gary Rosen still never the mayor.
Do you think in hindsight, if we had a time machine and could go back and inform the residents of the city of Worcester that Gary Rosen freely admits in 2018 to never having seen a Star Wars movie, do you think we could throw that election?
I don't think people care about it, Brendan. I think similar to the city council pay raise. Yeah. You'll get a small minority of people, vocal minority of people, who will say, "I'll never vote for anybody who never saw one of those." People who have no war but the Star War, those kind of people. But those kind of people, that's a tiny percent. That's 0.5% of the people in the general election.
Do you remember a lot of the collateral that was being used that election cycle? I think that was the election cycle as well, where Joe Petty had, the Quiet Man.
The Quiet Man.
It was him in the flugelhorn or French horn or something.
Was that the panda mailing?
I can't remember. There was a couple that went out that were they were kind of corny, but that Quiet Man one always stuck in my head because if there's any politician in Worcester that I think has done a 180 in terms of evolution in the city, it's probably Joe, and in a really neat way. He has gone from being one of the most literally silent, non-vocal members of the city council to being one of a pretty loud voice in the city when it comes to things that he actually believes in. That's
Gary, are we ready to go to a break? We can if we want to. I think that we want to. We'll be back with Worcester's Libertarian Voice, the 508 show, after these important messages.
Yeah, there was that whole series of mailers and whatnot. What are you fiddling with over there, Mike? What are you fiddling with?
The audio source.
Yeah.
So, Gabriel, can you look on YouTube for a video called Kevin Ksen, the sexiest of men, and use that to play us into the second section? Thanks.
So I've got a question for you. Before we started, we're still broadcasting, by the way, but before we started, Gabriella said she was going to count us down.
Mm-hmm.
She did so.
And we ignored it.
And then you just sat there. I'm curious what you were doing in your head. What was going on there?
I think I was expecting. I think that I write these.
Happen.
I think that I write these introductions, like this one about Leonidas, the king of Sparta, expecting that there's going to be some sort of music on top of it, so that I'm like have this background. And then I was like expecting that to provide a lot of energy that I would almost be countering that energy.
I think you need to start providing yourself your own internal soundtrack. Like.
It should be, so the last name is Ksen, Ksen. Look up Kevin Ksen, sexiest of men on YouTube.
I think you need an
Ksen.
You need to find an internal soundtrack.
I think that's what you need.
So you don't need any external.
An internal? You mean?
Where'd you go?
One inside of my heart. You mean?
Inside your
Yeah.
head. Yeah.
It's called Kevin Ksen. He's the sexiest of men.
Alcohol, drugs, murders,
You're from 6 years ago.
It's interfering with the small business and a small business that across the city.
You see it?
They have a 96% compliance rate, which means 96%.
I have no idea what's going on in this little bumper here, but people yelling. All I can hear is people yelling about murder and rape and whatnot. It was weird.
10 a.m. on Infinity Radio.
It was just a bumper, but it was very grim sounding. I don't know what it caused. What are you up to?
Keeping busy at the Carpenters now.
Yeah.
Good stuff. We're trying to change Worcester from a different direction.
We don't have a USB power source.
USB power source? No, the only one I saw was in the back room. There's one, but like a standard mail. Yeah. They're keeping you busy, the Carpenter side?
Yeah.
Good.
Busy, not trouble.
All of the football soccer, they play it every day. But Kevin loves his soccer, so it carries him away. He butts his head, he kicks his legs, and if by chance he falls, the women rush the field so they can play with Kevin Ball. He's the sexiest of men. Kevin Ksen, he's the sexiest of men. Kevin Ksen, he's the sexiest of men. And if you don't believe him, he will tell you once again. And if you don't believe him, he will tell you once again. Very good. Sorry, baby. There you go.
Live from our studio in a basement down an alley in downtown Worcester, this is episode 300 of 508, or the episode 508 of the 300 show, starring, I'm not even going to introduce everybody else, starring the sexiest of men, Kevin Ksen. Hi, Kevin.
Hey, thanks.
How old is that?
That's from 6 years ago?
Got our money's worth out of that
Or
one.
something like that. Yeah.
Thanks, Nat Needle.
Thanks, Nat Needle. Thanks all the drunk and non-drunk people standing on Pleasant Street singing that song.
That's fantastic.
I want to tell you about episode 100 of the 508 show, Kevin. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
So this was an episode where we rode the bus around Worcester, in episode 100, and we were looking at what was promising in 2010 for Worcester. Brendan, you were predicting Google Fiber.
Never happened.
Never happened. Google has been that way. They have a lot of things, and they don't all actually come to pass.
Well, Google Fiber happened. It just didn't happen here.
Oh, really? Where did it end up happening?
A significant number of cities.
Kansas City?
There's a number of.
Yeah,
it's a couple dozen now, if I'm not mistaken. They've slowed down the. Are you watching TV now?
No, I'm just trying to find my next file. Keep talking.
Oh, yeah. There's a couple dozen cities that they've rolled out to, and they still are rolling out. They're just slowing things down because now a big push seems to be happening for the next generation of wireless as well.
Also, that episode, Jeff Barnard was saying that his promising thing or his hopeful thing for 2010 was surviving the year 2010. Mm-hmm. And sadly, Jeff Barnard actually did not survive the year 2010. He died of cancer before the end of the year. Drew Wilson was on talking about the vegetarian renaissance being something, and how the vegetarian renaissance had turned from something which we sort of talked about as a joke into something which was actually not a joke, the vegetarian renaissance in Worcester. I kind of feel like we need to take credit for this phrase of the Worcester Renaissance to describe, a few blocks of downtown being renovated, being called a renaissance. I mean, I guess renovated, renaissance. But I want to take credit for us for us talking about the Worcester vegetarian renaissance long before anybody was talking about the Worcester Renaissance.
You brought that to everyone's attention.
Renaissance. The 508 show, a lot of people suck up said the 508 show is their most promising thing for 2010. Go ahead.
That was nice of them. No, where was Veg Fest at that point?
I mean, the first Veg Fest was at Worcester State College. It was there for a couple of years, and then it went to.
But it had already happened at
Worcester
that point
Tech.
when we had done that show?
I think it had
okay.
already happened at that point. Yeah. Went to Worcester Tech. It went to the Worcester Airport one year, and then it's been at the DCU ever since.
Okay.
And that has been something which has just grown by leaps and bounds. I mean, this year, taking up 50% more space in the DCU than last year, filling that space quite handily, doing really, really well. At this point, again, it could probably be twice as big as it is. There's just not a venue that large in the city of Worcester for the New England Veg Fest. The skating rink behind City Hall. Boy, there was a lot of catty conversation about the skating rink behind City Hall and about moving the bus hub. I feel like the thing about the skating rink behind City Hall is something where we were wrong. We were wrong to be critical of that, Brendan.
No, I can see that. Yeah, I think it was one of those things that seemed really goofy at the time. And I also remember, too, right after it opened up, somebody pointed out to me that our skating rink was actually bigger than the one at Rockefeller Center, just from a square footage perspective. And that was something that struck me. It's like, oh, well, I guess it's really not that crazy of a thing. But at the time, too, I mean, I certainly did not foresee a lot of the growth that is happening, right, wrong, or indifferent downtown. And I think the local population has just been a lot more eager or willing to go downtown, and now there's a built-in or starting to grow at a built-in population closer to the common. It is one of those amenities that just makes sense. I still think the timing around it is completely ridiculous. It seems like it goes up. It usually is installed will be the warmest day of fall, and then whatever. But
Brandon, I'm going to pass this remote control to you.
Yeah, I have no idea what I'm doing. I'll
see if you can get the USB drive back working with this. Back in 2010, consistent street signage was a hope. I feel like that's something we've done a lot better on since 2010. Is consistent street signage, complete streets policy. Kevin Ksen, you're shaking your head yes.
I think I agree, yeah.
I hope you always shake your head yes whenever I say anything, Kevin, because it really makes me feel supported. The Empower Biodiesel Co-op was something that people were excited about, and green jobs was something that people were excited about. Both of these things I feel like came to nothing, as it turns out. In this show, we have profiled many a thing and talked to many a person about many a project, and I would say 2/3 of them have not happened. I would say, or ended up not really working out. I would say 1/6 of them have gone on to do well, and I would say another 1/6 of them, like Veg Worcester, have just gone to blow up beyond anybody's dreams. But we do a bad job in coming back to the things that we talked about that didn't. We never look at what's stuff that we talked about last year that actually failed. We don't talk about that. The year in failure. Even though we have a negative attitude, we don't follow up on our negative attitude. The Stone Soup rebuild we talked about. Hell yeah, the Stone Soup rebuild. That went great. That's one of those things.
That's in the 6th?
That's in the 1/6 of things that do super great. Yeah, Stone Soup I feel like has been a really cool thing. Bruce Russell leaving for the summer, in Bruce Russell's opinion, that was a promising thing. I don't think that really happened in 2010. The fact that people are not giving up was a positive thing. The 2011 council campaign for the next year was what you brought up, Kevin. That was an impactful.
Remind me
council.
what I said.
You just basically were like, I'm excited for next year's city council campaign. I feel like maybe what you were that would have been Sarai Rivera's first run for the council, right?
Yeah, I don't remember if I was actually working yet or not.
That was, that actually was a consequential city council campaign in 2011. That was Barbara Haller getting out, and Sarai Rivera coming in, and maybe a couple of other changes. Don't remember off the top of my head. I can't figure out how to get this USB thing to work, Brendan.
Yeah, that's okay.
The Worcester World Cup you were excited about. How has the Worcester World Cup done since 2010?
Done very good. This year's we're going to have a little bit of challenge. We're looking like we're going to have to move because they're doing some renovations over at Foley.
I don't know if you're really talking into the microphone.
They're going to do some renovations over at Foley this year, so looks like we're going to be moving this summer, so trying to figure that out.
Dominican cultural things.
Dominican cultural stuff still going well. Casa Cultural Dominicana de Worcester.
Jesse Pack called in talking about the Transgender Emergency Fund, which I don't know that it's like blown up since then, but I would have to say that like trans issues have blown up since 2010 in a way that I would not have anticipated.
Well, we've got a ballot question this year too, statewide. That I
Yeah.
think it was the Globe was reporting this morning that just based on polling numbers, looks like it'll probably be one of the more contentious and active ballot questions in recent history.
Polling in terms of it looks like a 50-50 split.
I wouldn't call it 50-50, but contentious enough where poll watchers are actually, and both supporters and detractors are concerned that it could kind of go either way and will probably result in a more active summer than expected politically.
Jesse was also encouraged by the Obama administration's progress on HIV, which I have to admit, I have no idea how the Obama administration ended up doing on HIV. We'll never know. I guess maybe okay, because we haven't heard about it. I don't know.
Apparently better than Worcester is doing on syphilis.
Things that struck me back then is that is paying coins to use the bus in Worcester, which these days the bus is all about the Charlie card in Worcester. 2 minutes. Oh man. The bus hub then was still at City Hall and not in the new hub. And
Right.
I know that Kevin in particular was always a big critic of the idea of the new bus hub. And Kevin, I feel like the new bus hub is actually pretty good.
I think it's worked in a lot of sense. I think it's taken away still people from shopping downtown though.
Yeah, there needs to be more of a connection between the transit's place and places where people can actually do stuff. I guess in this case they brought them out into Mohammed and they've like actually built things across the street from the bus hub. So even though that street is still a bit daunting to cross as a pedestrian, you can do it, and maybe somebody would take your money for something over there.
Yeah, I think we'll have to watch that as the bank opens up over there and everything else.
Yeah, all right. Well, are we ready to go to a break? Gabrielle's so excited to go to this break. This is 508, Worcester's Week by Week Good Faith Survey of Evidence. We'll be back in a moment with more.
So I honestly have no idea what you're trying to get me to connect over here. It's
All right.
I went through every input on there, and it's not.
Why don't you find the USB cable that you saw? I'll try to get this to work.
Oh, no, the
Kevin-
USB cable isn't going to work. It's like it's one. As I said, it's a standard mail for a computer, not a.
Oh, okay. Well, Kevin, you want to say something interesting? There's somebody watching us on Facebook right now.
It's probably us. There you go.
Yes.
Good job. Look at that.
It's February 13th, 2010. I'm Mike Benedetti. This is episode 100 of 507 Worcester here. The long lost Jeff Barnard.
I don't know if I have any idea how to change the
Tracy
aspect
Novak
ratio on this.
and her daughters. Brendan
What are you trying to change?
The aspect ratio?
Looks like it's good, doesn't it?
No, because everybody's stretched. It should be 4:3, and this is 16:9.
You look really good. Had you lost some weight at that point in
I
time?
look slaughtered than I normally do. Oh, this is what it's like to be on this radio station.
Everything is very, very well planned. Yeah, it is mapped out. It's,
You get to listen to Gary Rosen on your headphones. It's pretty exciting.
Took them off.
I love that scarf. I think I lost that one.
And we can talk about 2012, I guess. How many more minutes do we have?
Look at that handsome young man.
3 minutes. Brendan, what do you want to talk about that is too intense for the people on the radio?
I looked pretty good 10 years ago. However long. How many was that? 20 years ago?
This was 8 years ago.
8
Oh, we
years.
all look great in this. We all look great in this.
The skin looks a little ruddy in that picture, though.
Oh yeah, we all
It was
look.
cold.
Yeah. It was a rough day.
I love that hat, though, too. That hat, that scarf. Even that. I still have that sweatshirt, but it doesn't fit anymore. It's like it's stretched out as sweatshirts. Well,
It will do. Yeah.
people at home must be thrilled listening to me talk about my clothes that I've lost over the years. But man, that was a great scarf. I think a dog ate that one. Yeah.
The years go by, the clothes get lost, the city changes. I do feel like the city is in a better place. Despite, maybe this is why this Renaissance thing has taken on this more momentum than you would think. It's just the sheer surprise of things happening in Worcester. Like, I feel like, especially in 2007, 2010, we were just like, people have said this is going to happen. And so we can all assume it's not going to happen.
Yeah.
Which was a reasonable perspective to have. And now I feel like if the city manager says, like, whatever, we're going to build a replica of the Eiffel Tower, everybody's like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
I guess it's going to happen. Whereas back then it was like, well, the one thing we know is there'll never be a replica of the Eiffel Tower in Worcester.
Right. Well, Maybe.
I'm still waiting for smiley faces downtown.
What's the mosaic?
I just want smiley faces.
I got one on Island Street.
Do you?
Yeah, it's got driving on Island Street more often. That's what we use as a flag.
Okay,
I open a
okay.
flag right now.
What's
Ever
the
since
sign-
Gary
what's-
Rosen accused me of being a communist for flying a rebel flag from Star Wars a couple weeks back, I switched it over to
What's the smiley faces downtown about?
I just think any other city would embrace the smiley face, and Worcester's too afraid to.
manhole covers. Imagine if we had yellow manhole covers that were like actual like the metal was. You know, you can find the old school manhole covers that say like Worcester Department of Water on them and whatnot. Just a big stamped smiley face. Who do we know that does metal work? We need to talk to folks at Technocopia. That's
We're gonna make some.
we're gonna start
some
tack
rogue-
welding right over the
rogue
existing manhole covers.
We're listening to Joe O'Brien right now. This is the water, and this is the well. Drink full and descend. The horse is the white of the eye, and dark within. This is the
And this is the well. Drink full and descend. The horse is the white of the eye, and dark within. This is the water, and this is the well. Drink full and descend. The horse is the white of the eye, and dark within. And this is Kevin Ksen, who is also the white of the eye and dark within. And this is the 508 Show. Hi, everybody. How's it going?
Not bad. I think you wanted a couple extra reads on.
You know, you're supposed to do it. One day I'll show you that video, and you'll know. You'll know how it's really supposed to be. You'll know how it's really supposed to be done. Everybody, you're listening to Unity Radio, broadcasting with 100,000 milliwatts of power on 102.9 FM and streaming at worcestermag.com. This show is also cablecasted on WCCA TV 194, podcasted at pieandcoffee.org, and live streamed to our Facebook page. You can call in live at 508-471-5265. That's 508-471-265. And thanks to the mighty Gabrielle Powers for engineering today's show. Episode 200 was an episode that we did at Woo Daddy.
Which is not what you have up right now.
Which is now, no, that's not what we have up right now. But yeah, do you remember? Did you ever go to that place, Woo Daddy, Brendan?
Yeah, all the time. It was actually, I think, I can't remember Saturday or Sunday, but we went pretty much every week. My
Sunday
son loved
morning.
the place, yeah.
Sunday morning. It was an interesting vibe. I mean, this is you remember this.
Mm-hmm.
This was back in 2012, so this is a mere 6 years ago, but it feels like forever. I think we did it near the end of Woo Daddy's run. They did this for a couple of years. Zali Zalkind and Sarah Harold, I think, were the masterminds of this, having a vegan-friendly waffle brunch at Moynihan's on Main Street every Sunday morning. And it was very much of a hangout for Worcester's different sort of Worcester underground communities, bohemian communities. And it was a great meetup spot. I know that whenever there would be like a big, like the anniversary, like the Go-Go anniversary party, or, like nowadays if you were to have some sort of Stone Soup anniversary party and people might come in from out of town and, stick around for the evening to stick around for the night, and the next morning everybody would always go to like Woo Daddy. It was always the place that that you could go to meet the people who you didn't get to talk at the party on Friday night or Saturday night. And that was another one of those things which just sort of came out of two people's dream, came in, fulfilled a really vital purpose in a certain community of Worcester, and then when those people moved away, went away. And there's nothing even slightly like that.
Yeah, I'd have to agree. Nothing filled that void. It's a shame because we could use that.
Yeah.
What actually happened to that place?
I mean, that's what happened. I mean, I think that there was always a certain amount of tension between Moynihan's and the brunch itself, because the people going to the brunch were not heavy enough drinkers that Moynihan's was getting a super great cut of the money for something like that. This is all similar to Billy Blue's weekly blues show that he would do at Gilrain's for a while, for a summer, I think, and it would always be packed with a bunch of non-drinkers.
Yeah, that's no good.
And so, like, one person at your table would order one beer, and Gilrain's was like, why are we doing this? This is crazy. Yeah. And a similar thing, I think, at Moynihan's. I mean, the real reason it went away, though, was, like, Zali and his wife and daughter moved to Boston. I think Sarah moved down to New York City somewhere. Okay. Yeah. And, people talked about doing it without them, but they were the visionaries. They were the ones who were making it happen. And they were, they also did a monthly Wednesday night free buffet, community buffet out of Moynihan's. They did a bunch of stuff, but that Sunday morning, definitely for pay waffle thing was the main thing.
That That always struck me at that point in time as probably one of the better examples of like a pop-up that looked like it from the outside, that it could have scaled very easily into a successful endeavor on its own.
I think so, yeah. I mean, again, I know that financially it was always a little bit fragile, but yeah, that's and again another thing which is really important. And if anybody ever, I don't know. I mean, I know that Chickpea, for example, used to have a nice Sunday morning brunch, vegan brunch, but it was just not the same vibe.
Nope.
It didn't have the same level of crowd. Something about everything just came together. You would not think that maybe you would think that Morning Hands was the right hangout for that, but it definitely was. That episode in 2012, which was 6 years ago, we asked everybody about how do you connect with people in Worcester. You suggested Seven Hills High Lie. I don't even know what that is, Brendan.
Neither do I.
Did you suggested that though?
All
right.
I was okay.
Some people suggested our championship yo-yo team, volunteering for the library or the land trust or the Catholic worker.
Did we have a highlight team in Worcester?
I don't know.
Was I suggesting that we start one maybe? Because that sounds kind of cool.
Maybe you were suggesting. It sounded a little bit speculative, but you weren't doing a good job of explaining what it was. I was also like, "What are you talking about?" And you were like, "Oh, don't you realize?" You may have been making a joke on something too.
You're familiar with highlight though, right?
I do know what highlight is.
Yeah.
Yes. It was suggested that people should walk down the street, which could be a good way to connect with people, I guess, to walk around Main South, to go to Woo Daddy, to go to university lectures, to go to Central Mass Striders weekly running events, to become active in politics or on issue politics, and to just Google stuff in the city of Worcester. I feel like none of those are really like the silver bullet or the easy answer somebody would be asking for, though, if they say, I just moved to Worcester and I can't find my people. What do I do?
Yeah, I don't know. That always struck me as a weird question. It still is striking me as a weird question now, so maybe that's why I made a joke of it and recommended starting a highlight team. I don't know.
We talked about Sunshine Week progress. That was maybe the last year that we really put our nose to the grindstone on Sunshine Week. We had 5 items go in front of the council, and we were just sort of shepherding those through the committee hearing process. And of those 5 items, which included the right to speak at council meetings, or at least that was what Ron Madnick was very interested in that year. Do we still have a right to speak at council meetings?
Yeah, for a few minutes at the beginning.
So we have some right.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, it gets negotiated, it seems like every 5 years.
The other big one was our effort to try and deal with this stupid video on the city's webpage.
The video on the city's webpage. This is something where I still have the actual speech that I read. This is something which we brought in front of the city council twice, and that they voted in favor of both times, and nobody acted on it, and still has not been acted on. So I could find this paper from 6 years ago and bring it up again and be like, hey guys, I know you voted in favor of this, but nobody's really been paying attention to the fact that the city has not done what you told the city to do. It's a different city manager now, I guess. Maybe Augustus, maybe we need to give him a shot at, using 21st century video technology.
Are we getting ready for another round of cable commission meetings leading up to a new contract with Charter too, though? Probably now's the time to start thinking about that.
I don't even know to what extent that's it. I feel like it's just like...
Well, that's where their budget comes from, though. So if you want to talk about any big changes in terms of the government cable channel, then yeah.
I don't think it's a big change. We talked about co-working spaces in Worcester, like Running Start on Lincoln Street, which then moved elsewhere, which then I've totally lost track of. We talked about the shop down in Webster Square, and we talked about Stone Soup. I still don't feel like co-working. I feel like co-working is one of those things like green jobs, although it's had a better future than green jobs. But co-working is still not really like blown up in a huge way. You know what I mean? Like for the people who use it and love it, it's like a part of their life, and for everybody else, people kind of don't even know what it is.
Because I think partly because people realize that, if I can work from anywhere, then it doesn't mean I have to hang around with a bunch of strangers that I might not actually like. I can go hang out in Tahiti and sit on a beach and work from there. It seems like I've found a lot more interest in, or see a lot more interest, especially online, in terms of people who are like more digital vagabonds than anything.
Yeah.
I mean, why would you want to stay put if you could actually go someplace where there's a lower cost of living and higher return on your investment in time?
Yeah, I guess so. Anyway, that was episode 200. That's all I have to say about that.
I mean, I remember being for a while, we were pretty amped up on talking about co-working and the growth in Worcester. In some areas that are like tangible, right? Like shared spaces around technology, like Technocopia or whatnot. I mean, that makes perfect sense where resources are there. But
there are real. I mean, that's the thing is like the co-working spaces that have done well, like Technocopia and Stone Soup, are amazing.
Right. But there are things that like you can't bring a CNC machine, to the beach. Mm-hmm. There's almost I can't think of much of anything in terms of technology now that would just if you were normally an office drone, right, and you're able to get out of that world and replace it with a co-working space. there's almost nothing that you can't do now from your phone. Never mind needing like a shared printer or fax machine or phone lines or whatnot. It seems like all the things that made co-working as a replacement for a traditional office space seem sexy at the time are now kind of irrelevant.
Well, I think that both Stone Soup and especially Technicopia, there's like a lot of add-on stuff. Like if you're using Technicopia as your space, you're also kind of in the same space as this youth education thing, the think tank, which means if at some point you decide, you know what, I really want to teach this thing, or if whatever your specialty is, the think tank's interested in doing a class, you're right there.
Sure.
And again, if you're you've been doing a lot of research on this and that, and you need to make a sign for your project, well, you can make a sign right there. You can, you can build whatever you need to build right there. So all of these things being in the same place, and also if you need to know about some local, if you need to 3D print anything and you don't know how to, the 3D person is right. The print person's right there. You have coffee with them every day. I don't know what somebody who was doing just random kinds of work online would want to have in their co-working space. I mean, maybe you would want to have the co-working space somehow the back half of like the back room of a coffee shop or something, so you sort of felt like, oh, well, like my graphic design business, like these people come in the coffee shop needing graphic design, and some of them drift into the back room and say, hey, I got a job for you guys. Like that's the same kind of thing you get out of a place like Technicopia or Stone Soup. Where there's a certain amount of like the networking is just being done for you by the fact that you're in that space. But yeah, we got 2 minutes left. You want to talk about the Task Force for Sustaining Housing First Solutions draft recommendations?
Am I supposed to remember this?
This is a thing. Well, this is a thing. So the city manager has a task force on housing, on homelessness this summer. And or this spring and this summer, and they've been having some meetings, and they've been having some public meetings, and they've come out with a first draft of recommendations. It says draft on it in faint gray letters to let you know this is not any kind of a final thing. Their overarching recommendation, their goal is to achieve and sustain a functional zero of adult chronic homelessness in the city of Worcester by creating a community response that incorporates the 5 components of housing first: crisis response, housing supply, support services, housing crisis, and a data-driven system. And I feel like the 2 interesting things in that sentence for people who don't follow this closely are, what does adult chronic homelessness mean? Which it's in distinction, it's in contrast to like, if I lose my housing or I lose my whatever, my job, and I got to crash on somebody's couch for a couple of months or live in my car for a couple of months, that's, a one-time deal. If that happens to me over and over and over, or that happens to me for years at a time, then I'm chronically homeless. And a functional zero means, let's say Worcester is routinely placing 20 homeless people in housing every month. Functional zero means that we have fewer than 20 homeless people in the city at any given point in time, so that everybody's kind of on a 1 month. There's like at most a 1 month waiting list for the system to get your housing situation straightened out. Do we want to go to a message? This is 508, Worcester's voice of advocacy for the homeless and the homeless libertarian alike. We'll be back in a minute with more.
You know what it kind of stinks is, I feel like, especially on the show, we've been talking about housing first model and like how it seemed like a no-brainer for quite some time, and now the city is finally getting that ball rolling at what might be the first time since the 70s that there's like a legit housing crisis. And like there's the whole idea of like, I remember a show that we talked about it in the context of like, if you just looked at the number of vacant homes that were on the market and showed no sign of being sold, there was something like 10 times as many homes without humans in them as there were homeless people nationally, right? So like, just not saying that's an easy solution, we're just going to start plugging people into homes, but the numbers, it kind of checked out where it's like, oh, like this functionally isn't something we can't conquer with the right work put in. Now we're at a point where like housing is actually at a premium. As a result, costs are going through the roof on housing, and the realities of the housing first model, starting especially in areas like Worcester where property values growing up substantially, it doesn't seem as hopeful, I think, as it did just maybe even pre-recession when the housing market was flush with housing units.
Yeah. I mean, part of this is trying to create 103 housing units in the next year and a half. Is one of the hopes of nonprofit organizations and private landlords should work together to produce 103 housing units. That's a lot of housing.
That's a ton of housing in a competitive market, is what I'm saying.
Yeah,
like, you know,
yeah.
this is like one of those times where I think any landlord, especially someone who's recently bought property, is going to have to do some serious math and say, we're probably not too far from the point where a lot of folks who, especially as properties turn over, properties that historically were willing to accept housing vouchers and whatnot, start rethinking that simply because the numbers have flipped. You know, the days of the $600 market rate floor of a 3-decker on Grafton Hill are long gone.
Right, and there's been no good conversation in City Council around how to deal with affordable housing in Worcester.
Yeah.
So it's probably the most hostile City Council we've had towards affordable housing in a long time. But even looking at things like linkages and things like that in terms of with the development that's coming to Worcester, you know, the city actively worked to prevent affordable housing in the old courthouse.
Mm-hmm.
Well, why couldn't we put a little bit of affordable housing in there?
Mm-hmm.
10 units, 20 units.
This is under housing crisis. The bullet item is the city should explore the establishment and piloting of a landlord-tenant insurance fund, which reduces the perception of risk for private property owners and eliminates housing barriers on rental applications.
All right.
No, that's
Great.
how we solve the housing crisis.
There it
Or
is. It's done.
that's the extent to which
We
this
can go
is
home now.
looking at that specific issue.
No, it's interesting timing. I mean, I even remember an email exchange not too long ago over the winter we were talking about housing and whatnot too, and it was like within a week of that email exchange that the Fed started. It was the first round of interest rate hikes that the Fed rolled out, which have drastically changed again the housing market, the cost of borrowing, the cost of building. That whole marketplace is changing. I think a lot faster than anyone was really expecting, and I guess it's.
I think we've seen the CDCs in Worcester slow down over the last few years.
Mhm.
So we're not generating any affordable housing from that way.
Yeah.
That's kind of breached it's done the job it could do. Are we coming back in now?
Yep. 5, 4, 3.
Museum of Oddities, and on the inside you're going to see nature's greatest mistakes. Grace McDaniel, look through the doorway. They're looking at Grace McDaniel, the mule-faced girl. You're going to look down into the beady eyes of a 23-foot python. You're going to see the giant spider, the octopus, 8-legged monster that can grow more than 30 feet in length. You're going to see the jaws of a live man-eating shark, rows and rows of vicious teeth. The barracuda ape, the devilfish from Atlantis. You're going to see 2 Burmese pythons alive, over 50 different attractions on the inside, and you're just in time. Stop. Look through the doorway. Look through the doorway. They're in there right now. A 2-headed calf, a 2-faced calf, a raccoon with 2 heads. That's right. 2 heads on the one body, and a live tarantula spider. Today, on 508 Show About Worcester, episode 300 with Kevin Ksen. Hi, Kevin.
Hey.
I got a number I want to throw out there. This is actually a great number to throw out there. $15 million. So this week, the people trying to preserve Notre Dame Church have probably continued to face a city government which is actively disinterested in helping with that effort at this point.
Mm-hmm.
It's been doing something for years and years now, and it's just throwing up its hands. They've filed an injunction against the transfer or the demolition or something of this, which was brought before a judge yesterday, and presumably the next couple of days we'll get a ruling on that. Ted Connor was on here talking about probably it would take something like $6 million to really get that property back in shape.
Mm-hmm.
And so I've been kicking around on this show a number of $12 million, that the city would realistically have to put into this property in order to really entice somebody to want to do something with it. Barbara Hallard this week asked the city council to approve up to $15 million. So that ballpark actually seems to be reasonable. So in the world of trade-offs, though, this is interesting to me, that I think we would all love to see this church preserved.
Sure.
The question is, in a world of trade-offs, of the other things you could do with $15 million. For example, you could ensure the security of the WRTA for 15 years. For $15
You could
million.
replace the facade of the Worcester Public Library twice.
twice your $15 million.
Yeah.
You could, you could do a lot of stuff with housing for $15 million. You could do a lot of stuff with homelessness for $15 million.
You could build a really rad housing complex for chronically homeless people with it would be like swimming pools and whatnot.
Yeah.
That's what you do. Nice build out there.
And as Worcester's Libertarian Voice, I would be remiss if not pointing out that you could just let people have $15 million and not have to pay that to the city. Whether or not you want a bunch of Worcesterites walking around with $15 million more in their pocket, probably that's a good thing.
We talked briefly when Ted was on the show with Ted about this, and he kind of, I think, scoffed at the idea, but I don't think intentionally. I just don't know if I think I maybe caught him off guard with it. That's all I can assume. Do you know if there's been any conversation amongst the group, to try and buy the place privately? I feel like that's the one thing that maybe the city dropped the ball on a little bit, was instead of huddling up and saying, do we have $8 million, 10, 12, whatever, $15 million, instead putting somebody from the economic team in City Hall with that group and said, here's what 10, 20 of you need to do to incorporate and buy this building, and here are banks that are lending in the area, which there are tons of right now. It seems like that's one component, because it's so.
Yes.
You're talking about numbers that are being proposed to City Council. What's really interesting is if you look on social media, members of the group talking about what it will take to save the building, the numbers are much, much smaller. It almost sounds like a small house is trying to be saved in terms of the numbers that are being kicked around.
I have $1 in my pocket right now that I would put into it for if it was a done deal. I would totally put it.
Yeah, no, it's just but there are some people involved, heavily involved with the group to save the church that do have development experience, that do have a lot of connections in the city that could probably make something. Buy the building. I think that would actually be really rad if you ended up having a group of concern. It might change the way things are done in the city substantially too. If there was a successful effort to save something meaningful through preservation efforts that actually had the city turn around and say, we're going to coach you in doing this the way we would any other developer coming into the town, buy it and do what you will with it.
Kevin, do you have a response to that?
To me, it just feels like Worcester gave up on Notre Dame a long time ago, and that's the sad part.
It did.
I think a lot of us just watched it decay.
Yeah. The 50s, according to today's Telegram and Gazette, they reran a headline of their own from the 50s where the headline was a proposal to tear down the church as a part of the construction of the Galleria Mall. That was the initial plan, was to demo the church. And
do you know much about the Worcester Memorial Auditorium? You know more than me. Let me say this way.
I remember going there almost I think it's at least once a month at the little theater with my grandfather. Yeah.
So this was the first week when talking to people about this issue, somebody brought up the as being like, well, we can preserve these beautiful buildings, but if we can't actually find anybody to do anything with them, then we have this weird giant thing like the that's just sitting there, looking, I guess, kind of pretty, but also off by its lonesome and definitely not being used.
I think the even better example is the Worcester Market on the corner of, I guess that side is Madison in Main Street, but most people think of it at the corner of Chandler in Main Street. The state offices haven't been in there for almost half a decade now. It's an empty building that is essentially, with the exception of some drywall that's been thrown up over the years and coverings of the ornate columns inside, it is the exact same public marketplace that existed 100 years ago. It in a country where things like public markets, and we're even having this discussion here in Worcester with Alan Fletcher's project down in Kelly Square. There's one sitting that's already been built. It's just waiting for somebody to come in and repurpose it. We can't seem to pull that off, right? The auditorium is maybe fantastic as a performing arts space if you put a lot of renovation into it. The church, it then gets into an area where it's like, well, we don't even have an idea. It's like we just know we don't want it to fall down.
Right. I wanted to tell a story that I didn't tell last week, but I'm going to tell this week. This is about the church that I used to go to in Manhattan. Now this is a long time ago, so I may be wrong about this. I believe it was St. Michael's on the Lower East Side was the saint of the church, and I knew a very slight amount about the finances of St. Michael's, which I knew were not in great shape. After I moved out of that parish and stopped going to that church, the priest of that parish was fired because the parish had an associated Catholic school, and as it turns out, because of declining revenues in the parish, he had for some years been playing around with the books of the school and the church in order to keep the church going, which is not what you're supposed to do. And so he was kicked out of there. And then it was like, well, now we have this church that has no money and has honestly a declining number of people going in there. And the Archdiocese of New York was like, well, we're just going to tear this church down. And then a mysterious benefactor with millions of dollars said to the Archdiocese, don't close it, here's millions of dollars. And they didn't close it. Yeah. And they took the millions of dollars and kept it open. There are people who have $15 million in the city of Worcester sitting in their pocket. And this is the thing, is like you spend 10 years trying to convince somebody, hey, give us $15 million for Notre Dame, give us $15 million for Mount Carmel. At what point do you say, you know what, this is actually not working? That person maybe doesn't exist. Or the people with $15 million are really going to preserve, I don't know what.
Yeah, we talked about this, I think, even before Ted came on, too. I mean, I'm fully in the camp that while I think it's probably the right thing to do real-time, taking the building down, I also fully accept the idea that 20 years from now my son's going to look at me and say, what were you thinking? Like, your generation actually destroyed that building, and I'm just preparing myself in advance to be mocked ferociously for that will be one of our terrible decisions as a generation. But in real time, it just doesn't make any sense. I mean, I was thinking on the ride down here, because I wanted to ask you this question, Kevin. I think one of the side conversations with all that is happening downtown and in Worcester in general, we've kind of got, and Mike have been threading this in and out of a lot of conversation we've been having, is the concept of gentrification, whether or not we're already going down that road, if we're approaching it. I was thinking on the way down here, like, that's another kind of conundrum with that building as well, too. Like, even if someone did show up with $15 million, what are the viable uses for that space in the middle of downtown that wouldn't almost push the needle further on the gentrification front? I think when Ted was here, we were talking about rock climbing gyms. We were talking about some performing art spaces, art galleries, and whatnot. I couldn't think of any suggestions that have been thrown out that didn't squarely fit into the gentrification corner of development. Yeah,
I think it's important for us to remember too that there was a proposal for that was viable, but it was tied to the slots parlor. And so when Hanover didn't want to sell at that point, and the slots parlor fell apart. And, but there was drawings for a swanky hotel there. Yeah.